Hello, everyone. I am Gary Houchens. I'm a professor of education administration at Western Kentucky University. I also serve as a policy advisor to several organizations across Kentucky. And from 2016 to 2019, I served on the Kentucky Board of Education, where I was chair of the Curriculum Assessment and Instruction Committee. I'm a 25-year educator. The vast majority of those years have been in service to public schools, and I'm also a passionate advocate for school choice. And so it's my honor to be able to share some information with you about this topic that I've invested a lot of the last decade to. And so I think what I'd like to do is share a little bit with you about why I am passionate about this issue, talk about what the concept of school choice is, and then address a couple of the key public policy issues related to school choice that Kentucky is facing at this time. So in my career, I've been a teacher, I've been an administrator, a school district administrator, and for the last 12 years, I've been at WKU training teachers who are aspiring to become school principals. So I've spent an awful lot of my time in service, directly or indirectly, of the public school system. And yet a lot of people ask me, Gary, why do you hate public education? How can you be a product of public education and at the same time advocate for school choice? And so I think it's important for me to talk about how I got to this point. And the main thing that I want to say, of course, is that like my friend, the late Bam Carney, I believe that one can be an advocate for public education and at the same time be an advocate for school choice. These things are not mutually exclusive, because one of the things I have learned in my 25 years in this business, having visited probably more than 100 schools in Kentucky and in other states, is that no school, no matter how good it is, can be the perfect fit for every single child. And we simply we put educators in a terrible situation when we ask them to be all things to all children, because every child is unique, has special learning needs of various sorts. Every family is unique in terms of their values and their priorities and what they want their child's education to accomplish. And as a result of that, I believe that every family, regardless of their income or the neighborhood they live in, should have a choice in education provider in any community big enough to sustain multiple education providers. School choice should not simply be the purview of families who have the money to be able to choose a school for their kids. And it is for those families, those families especially who are under-resourced, that I advocate for this issue and are the reason that I got into this business in the first place, right? So 25 years ago or more, when I was discerning a call to be a teacher, it never once occurred to me that I should be a teacher so that I could defend the public education system somehow, right? My first year as a teacher, I didn't walk into that building and look around and say, wow, look at this brick and mortar, look at these desks, look at those school buses out in the parking lot. This is what it's all about, right? I didn't think like that, and I don't think any young teacher thinks like that, because the infrastructure of educational delivery is not what's important. It is meeting the needs of individual students. That's what got us into this business, and that's where I remain committed. And so any institution that can effectively deliver a high quality education to meet the needs of individual children, I'm in favor of, because ultimately I believe that we should fund schools, not systems. And that's the core idea behind school choice, is that we need to start rethinking our 100-year-old model of education funding. And we should treat education the same way that we treat other highly personal public goods. We should not treat education the same way we would treat a public utility. And I actually get this from time to time from people who'll say, "Oh, Gary, you must be some kind of libertarian who wants to privatize everything. You probably want to privatize the fire department too." And I'm not a libertarian. I may have flirted with that philosophy when I was a young man, like a lot of us do, but I'm not a libertarian. The fact is that education is quite different than the fire department. If there's a fire at my house, there's probably only so many ways to put out that fire, and they would look very similar to the way the fire department would treat a fire at your house. But educating children is not the same thing as putting out fires. I don't know a lot about how to lay sewer lines, but I suspect that there are only so many ways to lay sewer pipe. But our children are not sewer pipes. They are unique individuals. My two children, Lydia and Henry, are as different from each other as two siblings could possibly be. And our family differs from other families in terms of our values and our priorities and what we want our children to accomplish from their educational experience. And so there ought to be some level of personalization in how children are educated, and therefore there should be some choice in provider of education. And this is not such a foreign concept. We do this all the time with other public goods. So for example, in higher education, we consider access to higher education a public good. And so we have a federal Pell Grant program that helps low-income students apply for and be admitted to any university that they choose to pursue and use that Pell Grant benefit at that institution. And that includes private and it includes faith-based institutions. And we don't think twice about that because we understand the public good here is access to higher education, but we honor the beneficiary with a choice of where they are able to obtain that benefit. It's similar with the GI Bill, federal subsidized student loans, and so forth. Healthcare is another good analogy. We have collectively decided as a country that we believe healthcare access is a public good, and I believe that it is. And so we have these massive federal programs like Medicare and Medicaid to ensure healthcare access. And I'm not here to argue the merits of those programs. I just want to point out how they work. People have to make highly personal decisions about their own healthcare. And as a result, we honor the beneficiaries of Medicare and Medicaid, typically with a choice of their provider in any community that's big enough to sustain multiple providers. I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky. We have two hospitals there. We have Greenview Hospital. We have the medical center. No one ever says we are draining money from or stealing money from Greenview Hospital because someone uses their Medicare benefit at the medical center. We don't say that because we understand that Medicare and Medicaid are not there to prop up hospitals. They are there to help individuals get access to high quality health care. And we honor their choice within a framework of a heavily regulated market that ensures some level of quality and oversight to that whole process. It's only in K-12 education that we systematically deny low and middle income families a choice of their provider when it comes to education. And it's fundamentally unjust in that sense because affluent families already have school choice. They are able to buy homes in the neighborhoods or the districts where they want their children to be able to go to school, or they're able to afford private school tuition if they feel like that's what's in the best interest of their family. So school choice is for low and middle income families. Don't believe the nonsense that you'll hear from the opponents of school choice. This is all about somehow helping rich people keep sending their kids to private schools. Rich people don't need any help doing that. They already have that choice. What we're fighting for here is to give other families the same kinds of choices, including the choice to educate your child in a faith-based environment that the affluent already enjoy. So the people who oppose school choice, at the end of the day, they value the dollars that those children represent more than they value the principle that parents should get to choose. And they're functionally willing to bar the door of the schoolhouse and keep those children from leaving in order to maintain their control over them. Now, I have many, many friends after 25 years in this business. I have many friends working in the education establishment who disagree with me on this issue. And I know that they don't want to do harm to kids. They must sincerely but mistakenly believe that the system actually is better at making educational choices for children than parents are. And I respectfully disagree with that, because there's no doubt that there are challenges that parents face in making choices for their children every day. But at the end of the day, I will trust parents to make the best choice for their kids more than I will trust a state-run monopoly to do so. Their school choice is not an issue that is it's not a cause that's going to fix everything that is involved in public education. But I can't think of I can't think of any school improvement issue or concern about education that isn't strengthened in some way by giving parents more choices in where their kids attend school. So if you're concerned about what's going on in education, if you're concerned about critical race theory, if you're concerned about transgender ideology in our schools, if you're concerned about mask mandates or vaccines, then you ought to also be willing to empower parents to ultimately decide whether those are the environments that they want their kids to be a part of or not, and honor parents' decisions one way or another. So that's for me the fundamental argument and case for school choice, and why, as a public educator, I believe in this issue. I'd like to turn to two specific school choice policy issues that are currently facing Kentucky and talk about those, and that includes charter schools and education opportunity accounts. So first of all, a word about what charter schools are, because this is one of the oldest school choice policy mechanisms in the country. Approximately 46 states already have charter school policies of one sort or another. The thing to know about charter schools is that they are public schools. They cannot charge tuition for children to attend there. They have to take everybody who comes. If you have more students apply for admission to a charter school than there are seats available, you have to have a lottery to decide who gets to get in. So they're open to everyone. But what makes them unique is that the charter school operates independently from the local public school district. And this enables them to have a level of innovation and creativity and flexibility in how they do their work, especially in terms of meeting the needs of children who have been traditionally underserved in traditional public school environments. What also makes charter schools unique is that they are schools of choice. No child ever attends a charter school unless their parent has chosen that school for them. And in this sense, that gives charter schools an extra layer of accountability. Charter schools are actually more accountable than traditional public schools because they still have to meet all of the rules and regulations related to testing and accountability and civil rights laws and public health and safety and so forth. But in addition to that, charter schools have to satisfy their family clients. And if they don't, they'll not be in operation very long. Now, we know from the experience of other states that you have high-performing charter schools and sometimes low-performing charter schools, just like there are traditional public schools that do quite well and there are traditional public schools that struggle. The difference is that because of all of the things that I've just mentioned here, a struggling charter school can be shut down, whereas a struggling traditional public school could potentially suck tax dollars in perpetuity. And so charter schools are actually more accountable in this sense, and they have a dramatically impressive record of achievement in serving some of our most struggling students. So what research shows is that charter schools work especially well for students who are from urban environments and students of color. Research is pretty clear on this, that a student of color in an urban environment who attends a charter school is statistically far more likely to outperform his or her demographically similar peers who attend a traditional public school. So if we're serious about closing achievement gaps based on race, and we're serious about racial equity in our schools, and we're not willing to take a look at charter schools as a way of addressing that problem, then I question whether we were really serious about addressing those gaps in the first place. So Kentucky in 2017 finally passed our first charter school law. That was a significant moment for us. It was not a great law, quite honestly, in comparison with the charter school laws in other states, but it was our foot in the door. It was a way to get started in this policy front. But that bill only had a one-year funding mechanism attached to it, and that expired. And so what that means is that for 5 years now, we haven't had charter schools in Kentucky, because even if you could open a charter school, there's no mechanism for education dollars to follow the student to their school. So this year, House Bill 9, which passed out of the House just yesterday as I'm recording this, addresses that problem. House Bill 9 creates a permanent funding mechanism for charter schools. So it sets up a situation where those dollars can actually follow those students and create a situation where charter schools have a chance to be financially successful if they can attract students. House Bill 9 also guarantees that there will be 2 charter schools opened in Kentucky, one in Louisville and one in Northern Kentucky. Otherwise, House Bill 9, as it's currently written, does not really change the law from 2017. And that's a bit of a problem, because our context has changed here since 2017. Under House Bill 9 and the existing charter school law, to apply for a charter school, you've got to go through your local school district. They have to approve it. And quite frankly, local school districts are not going to approve charter applications, because they're never going to allow a school to open that's going to compete directly with them. They may pursue a charter on their own to try to address some unmet student or community need within their district, but they're not going to grant a charter to someone who's going to compete directly with them for students. And the only appeal under House Bill 9 for an applicant who gets turned down by the local district is to the Kentucky Board of Education. And that's problematic, because in 2019, on his first day in office, Governor Beshear fired all the members of the State Board of Education, that included me, precisely because we were supporters of school choice, and replaced them with his own folks who obviously are not. So my concern with the current structure of House Bill 9, while it still is a really important move forward in terms of charter school funding, is that as it's currently written, we're not going to have more than 2 charter schools in Kentucky. And so my hope is that as that bill moves into the Senate, there will be more consideration of how we can strengthen this bill and increase the likelihood that we'll have a number of high-quality charter schools in Kentucky. So now let's talk a moment about education opportunity accounts, because that concerns private school choice. Charter schools, as we said, are public schools. But what if I'm a family of modest income and I want my child to be able to attend a private or even a faith-based school? Well, that's where education opportunity accounts come in. These are sometimes called scholarship tax credits. 18 other states have a policy like this. And the policy mechanism itself is a tax credit that encourages private donations to scholarship programs that help eligible families with education costs, including private school tuition. And last year, we were able to pass House Bill 563. That was a major accomplishment for the General Assembly last year. They passed it over Governor Beshear's veto, of course. But that created an education opportunity account program like this, that for which students in the 8 largest counties in Kentucky are eligible to participate in. It has a 5-year sunset provision, and it set a cap of $25 million to the total value of the tax credit. Well, what we know from the experience of every other state that has adopted any school choice policy is that the instant that they do that, the education establishment sues in court to try to stop the implementation of that law. And that's exactly what happened here in Kentucky, where we had a group of boards of education who sued the state to stop the implementation of of House Bill 563 last year. Now, understand what that means. These boards of education are using taxpayer dollars to sue the state to prevent families in their own district from having an educational option other than the schools that they operate. It's really quite a shame, but it works, at least temporarily. And so their lawsuit has had that bill tied up in state court ever since it passed. And currently we're waiting for the state Supreme Court, who has agreed to hear that case, to set a time for arguments and hopefully render a good judgment on our behalf. In the meantime, there's an opportunity to make improvements to last year's law. And so we have House Bill 305 and its companion bill in the Senate, Senate Bill 50. What these bills would do is make the eligibility for participating in this program statewide. And what that would do is obviously benefit families who live outside of those 8 largest counties, but it also helps to address one of the key provisions upon which the law is being challenged legally. That 8-county restriction is part of the lawsuit. And so making this program statewide would not only help more children, but would also help to offset some of the legal arguments that are being made against the bill. House Bill 305 also removes that 5-year sunset, and it raises the income eligibility threshold so that more families can participate, and it raises the overall cap because we know that based on our experience watching this policy in other states, a $25 million cap would enable us to assist about 5,000 students statewide, but based on the average scholarship amount. I don't know whether we would hit that 5,000 student threshold in the first year or not, but within a few years, we will be in a situation where we'll have families waiting in line for more opportunity to participate in this. So we know that we're eventually going to have to raise that cap anyway, based on the experience of other states. Senate Bill 50, the companion bill, it doesn't raise that cap quite as high, but otherwise it also makes it statewide and takes away that 5-year sunset provision. House Bill 305 is waiting to be assigned to committee. So what we need right now in these waning days of the General Assembly is for House leadership to assign that bill to committee so that we can get votes on it, or else have the Senate pick that up on their side and see if they can address the EOA issue and the EOA need as the legislature moves forward in its work. So I would like to just conclude by kind of recapping some of the most common arguments against school choice, and this will echo some things that we've already talked about here today. But the most common thing that you're going to hear from opponents of school choice is that these policies somehow drain money from traditional public schools. And I think the way to respond to that is to just acknowledge up front that those dollars don't belong to those schools, right? That the state legislature appropriates money for education for the educating of students. And the state legislature also has it within its power to say, we can have additional providers participate in the delivery of that public good. So it only drains money if you think that those dollars actually belong to the school in the first place. And in the case of EOAs, we're not talking about public dollars. That Education Opportunity Account program is based on private donations. And a tax credit is not an appropriation. And courts, including the United States Supreme Court, have ruled accordingly many times. Tax credits are not appropriations. And if you consider them such, then that's kind of a slippery slope if you start thinking about all the other tax credits that exist out there. As I said, charter schools, going back to the accountability issue, charter schools are more accountable than traditional public schools in many ways. And the analogy I'd like to use is this. My children go to a pediatric dentist. She's fantastic. And in addition to kids like mine, she serves a large number of children on Medicaid. Now, nobody ever says, oh, this lady's not accountable. This dentist is not accountable. And look at her. She is feeding at the public trough by taking money to serve these kids, right? Nobody says that about her, and nobody thinks that about her, because they understand that those Medicaid dollars are to benefit those children. And she does her work within a highly regulated and licensed market environment where there is accountability to taxpayers through those regulation and legal mechanisms, but also accountability directly to the families she serves. Because if those Medicaid families that she works with are not satisfied, they'll take their dollars somewhere else. So rather than treat her like a villain, our community treats her like a hero, because that's what she is, because she's meeting the needs of some of our most vulnerable families in our community. Last thing to say here. We know from the experience of other states that school choice will not destroy public education the way that so many of its opponents seem to suggest. We know this just by looking across the border in Indiana or even to Florida. Florida is a great example because it has one of the most robust school choice policies in the country and has for decades. And in addition to thousands of students who have benefited from school choice policies, the public school students in Florida outperform the public school students here in Kentucky across every single demographic variable. And so we can look at their experience and know that the public education system is alive and well in Florida, just as it will be in Kentucky. The difference is that Florida gives every family a multitude of options in who educates their kids. And the families in Kentucky, the students of Kentucky, deserve every bit as much as the families and students of Florida. And so I thank you for your interest in this issue and taking the time to learn more. And I encourage you to stay engaged and informed on this issue and advocate for all Kentucky families that they might have the same opportunities that our affluent families do.
Gary, thank you. I'm
Thanks,
going to
Richard.
come around this
Sure.
side and we'll do some questions if we could. I'm going
Absolutely.
to bump you over. Thank you. Why don't you pull that over? There we go. Gary, I want to thank you for doing this legislative briefing for the Commonwealth Policy Center. Thank you for bringing light into a subject that's been very difficult for many people, especially in the legislature, especially as they're receiving pressure from many in the field of education. I want to bring up, go over a couple points, and you did a very good job answering the objections. I was taking notes as you were sharing. I had lunch with a newly elected state representative from South Central Kentucky who happens to be an elementary school principal. Good guy.
Mhm.
He shares a lot of the same values that you and I have, but he is convinced that school choice will hurt public schools, at least in his context. He brought up a couple of objections. In fact, I'll go ahead and read a quote regarding House Bill 9, the charter school bill. He said this: in my opinion, House Bill 9 is a vote against public education. Now, this is coming from a guy who's invested his life in the public school. He's invested his life in his community and in the kids there. But he really is convinced that somehow charters are going to hurt, or public school choice, let me say that, school choice in general is going to hurt his community. He had shared with me over lunch that he's afraid that when school choice comes into a community, the charter schools, for example, could cherry pick the best kids and leave those who have special needs, those who might need special attention, leave them behind in the public schools where the public, and it sounded like it might be too great a burden for the public school. Can you address that
Sure.
in particular?
Well, I'll say this too, because of the 2017 charter school law, we went ahead and created charter school regulations that govern the oversight, the financial transparency, the accountability of charter schools. And I'm convinced that in Kentucky's context, we probably have the most rigorous system of charter school oversight in the country. And so it is absolutely clear under Kentucky law and regulation that charter schools can't be selective in who attends their schools. They have to serve students with special needs. They have to serve all comers. The only preferences are that once you're admitted to a charter school, your seat is secure there. right? And there is, I think within House Bill 9, there is a mechanism where a sibling might be able to get a preference to attend that school. But there's nothing within the law that would allow a school to pick students based on their academic performance. In fact, that would be strictly forbidden. And if that were to happen, then the charter school would risk losing their charter and actually not just being sanctioned, but actually go out of business if they committed that kind of violation.
As a whole, charter schools across the country, do they do better? Again, overall, do they perform better than their public school counterparts? Because I know, and you mentioned that not all charter schools are up to par,
right?
Are doing the job.
Yeah.
As a whole, though.
So this is an interesting analysis because you have, I think, roughly 6,000 charter schools across the United States. If you throw all of those schools together, and then you all throw the tens of thousands of traditional public schools together in another pile, and you try to do an analysis, you find out pretty quickly that there is not a substantial difference between charter school achievement and traditional public school achievement. But what's interesting to note about that comparison is that charter schools typically do their work with anywhere from a third to 3/4 of the same funding as traditional public schools. And charter schools educate higher percentages of low-income minority students and slightly higher percentages of students with special needs in comparison to traditional public schools. So even if you do an analysis that shows charter schools do no better, they do no worse overall, they're still doing something special with very needy students, and they're doing it more efficiently than traditional public schools. Now, the Stanford studies that have looked specifically at urban charters, that's where you find that statistically speaking, students in urban charter schools do outperform students in similar traditional public schools. And so that's why I'm an advocate for school choice, even whether test scores show that it works well overall or not. But one thing is absolutely clear is that urban students have a real opportunity to benefit from charter schools.
Very good. There seems to be a lot of angst in the education community when any kind of change comes about in the legislature. I'm going back to just a few years ago with the pension reform. We had teachers coming in to the Capitol protesting loudly. I'm not sure if everybody knew what was in that bill or what was trying to be done with that bill.
Right.
But why, in general, Gary, why is there so much opposition from those involved with Kentucky education when there's any kind of change involved? Are they misinformed? What's going on? And you did touch on this, but I'd like to hear it again.
Well, I think that the first thing to acknowledge is that the term I use, the education establishment, is not the same thing as teachers writ large. Right?
So explain that.
Right.
What do you mean?
So we have organizations that exist in the state, like teachers unions, professional associations that represent superintendents, school boards, school administrators. They have policy positions and policy agendas. And they typically are ferociously opposed to school choice and a lot of other education reforms as well. But they don't always speak on behalf of the majority of Kentucky educators. And so I know from personal experience over the years, talking to many ordinary classroom teachers who say, I agree, we have to make changes to our pension system. Our pension system is going to ruin the state financially if we don't make changes. Lots of teachers knew that and acknowledged that. I have teachers tell me, I don't have a problem with school choice. If a person is unsatisfied with our school and they want to go try someplace else, who am I to close the door and say, no, you can't leave, you have to take what I'm selling you, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge that those groups, those organizations don't speak for most Kentucky teachers. And I think they see their job as essentially to protect the system. Because as we were saying earlier, I think they sincerely believe that the system knows better than parents and communities. about how to best educate their kids. And I think they sincerely believe that. I just think there is a deep kind of arrogance and paternalism at work in that assumption that we can't trust parents to make decisions for their children. We know better because we're the educators, you know. And I think that's the assumption that has to be challenged.
Sure. According to a poll by EdChoice Kentucky, over 70 or about 70% of Kentuckians favor some kind of school choice. Are our elected leaders hearing that? Are the local school administrators hearing that people in Kentucky are clamoring for some kind of choice?
Yeah, well, the challenge is that ordinary families who believe in school choice or support that concept, they don't have a well-organized, taxpayer-funded union or lobbying organization to help them get that voice across. And so it's like I told a lawmaker just within the last few days, you're never going to get as many calls or emails from ordinary folks who believe in school choice as you are from folks within the education establishment, because there is no comparable lobby to organize those phone calls and emails and make all of that noise in comparison to the education establishment itself. And so at the end of the day, you've just got to make the right call on this issue, even though you may get a lot of phone calls from people who got an email from the KEA.
Yeah, very good. Gary, any final words before we close out?
Just that I think one of the things that we've learned in the last 2 years through COVID and through all of the things that have unfolded as a result of that, I think parents are more aware than ever of both the strengths of their local schools and the weaknesses of their local schools. And I think we all need to be especially dedicated now to making our schools better. And there are a wide variety of ways to do that. We need to be more engaged. If you choose a local public school for your children, that's great. In most cases, that's the right choice for your family, I think. But you need to know what's going on there and be actively engaged and insist on transparency and accountability on the part of the educational system. And at least part of that accountability ought to be empowering parents with the ability to walk away if they don't feel like that's the right fit for their kids.
Very good. Gary Houchens, thank you so much for joining us on this legislative briefing.
Thanks, Richard. My pleasure.